CQ.
Hi, and welcome back to CQ, the AWS Certification Quiz Show, where we're here to help you get some prep in for your next AWS exam. Rick, welcome to CQ. Thank you for coming on such short notice.
You're welcome.
Seeing as your boss was actually supposed to join me today, thank you for being here. Tell us a bit about what you do here at AWS.
Okay, well, happy to be here. Thanks very much.
We'll get him on in a few weeks.
We will,
a bit of payback.
Definitely.
Nice.
So my name's Rick O'Sullivan. I'm one of the senior cloud architects. I work in the financial services division of ProServe. So my customers are heavily regulated industries, so banks and insurance companies.
Nice.
Yeah, cool.
And what's going on in your customers at the minute? Tell us a bit of buzz that's in financial services and ProServe right now.
So there's actually quite a bit going on for our customers right now. For the most part, we're doing a lot of work around landing zones, so helping build those foundational services.
Fantastic.
Yeah, the landing zone's really cool. Getting those guardrails in place, getting multi-account structures set up for organizations to operate their workloads in AWS.
Wow. Super cool stuff. So, seeing as it was short notice, I got to choose where we stream from today. And I went for Samoa, saw the new Fast and Furious movie not so long ago, Hobbs and Shaw, so I got a bit of inspiration from there. So thank you for joining me. Today, we are once again looking at the SysOps Administrator Associate Level Exam. You up for that with me?
Let's do it.
Rick?
Yep.
So we are using the official exam guide from wiley.com, also available at amazon.com. Rick, shall we have a bit of a look at question number 1? Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go. Question 1, VPC. You have a high security VPC with no internet gateway. However, an Amazon EC2 instance in the VPC wishes to access Amazon SQS queue. What is the simplest way to enable this?
Okay, so this is a great question. This comes up a lot. So the customers that we deal with certainly want to access AWS services, and for the most part, when they're building their environments out, they want that high level of security. So as we can see, one of the key words is high security, so we'll keep that in mind.
This is a very keyword heavy question actually, Rick.
It is.
High security being the first one, yeah.
Yep, and they want to access SQS. So for those who don't know, SQS is our simple queue service. So it's a fully managed messaging service, allows you to decouple your applications from the messaging overhead associated with processing messages. So great service, recommend everybody check it out if they're building near real-time or transactional apps. So let's have a look at the options and see which one sounds the best. All right, so 1 and 2 talk about VPC endpoints. They do sound very similar. So we might skip them and see if we can Let's see if we can eliminate some of the questions, some of the options for the answers first. So let's go to 3, Direct Connect. So Direct Connect is a way for customers to securely create a connection between their on-premise data centers to AWS services. So this is a cool option, but for this particular use case, because we're talking about EC2 workloads connecting to AWS services, we wouldn't want that traffic to traverse a direct connect, so we can immediately rule number 3 out.
And luckily everyone in the poll has also ruled it out so far.
Clever.
So going well. What about number 4?
Audience. So number 4, it's not possible to access SQS without an internet gateway. This is just false.
Yeah.
So you can definitely access the AWS services without an internet gateway, and as we touched on earlier, many of the customers that we deal with want that high level of security but still need to access the AWS resources.
So on that, Rick, why would there be no internet gateway?
For the most part, customers want to control access, so they don't want egress. They want a little bit of visibility on what's happening in terms of the traffic flows. So you would generally build VPCs that would have a central account or a central process for managing that egress traffic. So you would definitely not want internet gateways in all of your VPCs. So that leaves us with 1 and 2. Now 1 and 2 are great because depending on the question, you could actually pick either. Right? So if we talk about number 2 just for a second, if the question asked us about S3 or DynamoDB,
great call out.
Then a VPC gateway endpoint would be your logical answer here. But because we're talking about SQS, it is accessed via a VPC interface endpoint. So I'm going to stick with number 1 as my answer for this one.
Locking in number 1. Quick check on the poll. You almost got there. We're 87% in agreement.
I can see why a couple would want to go with number 2.
It does make sense.
Definitely makes sense for some of our services.
Shall we see how you're setting the tone for the show?
Sure.
One it was. Off to a great start. Let's move on to question number 2.
Okay.
All right, Amazon EC2. You need to launch an Apache web server on an Amazon EC2 instance. What is the best way for a systems administrator to do this?
Okay. So there's a couple of things here that I want to call out straight away.
Okay.
All right. Number 1 is Apache web server. So that's essentially just a web package that you can install on an EC2 instance. It provides connectivity to HTTP or HTTPS sites that would run on that server or something behind it. We need a systems administrator to set this up. Right?
So that's the key here, right? This is role specific, this question.
This one is talking about what a systems administrator will do, not an end user.
Got it. Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's have a look at the options. So number 1.
Straight away I can tell you. Oh, actually we did have 100%. It's just dropped down a little bit, so I'll leave it back over to you.
Okay.
1 and 3 at the minute.
All right.
Popular.
So, yeah, let's dig in and we'll see if some of those people change their answers by the end.
Okay.
All right, so number 1, launch an EC2 instance, use SSH to access it and configure the Apache web server.
Yep.
Totally doable.
Yep.
Right? This is a mechanism for configuring EC2 instances.
Yeah.
You definitely can do that. In this particular case, is it the best way for a systems administrator to do it?
Which is what we're looking for, yep.
Yep, I'm going to say probably not. Let's dig into the others and come back to it and we'll just see.
So not totally getting rid of 1. Let's have a look at number 2.
Yep. So number 2, the metadata field provides commands to install an Apache web server. Okay, so EC2 instances have this concept of instance metadata, which is a mechanism for consuming information about a resource. So this will have information about IP addresses, host names, configuration values that are specific to the resource, but you wouldn't really use it for configuring a resource. No. So we can discount number 2. Number 3 is the user data field. So this is in the same family as the instance metadata. So user data is a mechanism for controlling and configuring EC2 instances. Yep. So you can do this in a non-interactive way, which means you don't need to provide all of the overheads and the scaffolding for SSH and internet gateways and all sorts of stuff.
So it's sounding pretty good.
So number 3 sounds like the logical solution here, because you can actually embed commands into the user data and let the EC2 instance configure it on launch. And then number 4 is using the marketplace to find an Apache web server AMI. Definitely a viable
a good
option.
Answer. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly plenty of use cases for this. But in this particular case, because we're talking about a systems administrator doing this work and not an end user just looking for an Apache web server, probably wouldn't be our obvious choice. Yep. So for me, I think number 3, using user data as a mechanism to provide commands is the most appropriate.
We just got there on the polls as well. Most people are agreeing with you. Locking in number 3.
Let's do it.
3 it is.
Okay,
fantastic. Cool. Rick. Goodness, already on to question number 3. Let's do it. Storage. Ready?
Let's do it.
Your application's Amazon EC2 instances need a single shared volume to edit common files. What is the best volume to attach to the instances?
Okay, cool. So there's a couple of options here, which is cool. So we'll see where the viewers end up landing on this one, but let's sort of break it down and just go through what the available options are.
Okay, let's do it.
All right, so number 1, using an EBS volume with provisioned IOPS. So EBS volumes can be attached to EC2 instances, 100%. You can't share an EBS volume across instances. So regardless of whether it's provisioned IOPS or not, then this option just doesn't make sense in terms of this particular question.
So you're ruling out really 1 and 4 here, is what you're doing?
Yeah, look, I think I am. I think, they're good distractors. They're good ways of showing that there are different types of EBS volumes available. But in this particular case, regardless of the volume type, you just can't share EBS volumes across EC2 instances.
Good learning for us all.
That leaves us with 2 and 3.
Yeah,
so
okay.
2 and 3 both can definitely be attached to EC2 instances. Multiple EC2 instances can access both of these. So, I can see how the polls might be split between 2 and 3, but let's dig in just a little bit more.
Okay.
So if we look at 3 just for a second,
S3.
Accessing an S3 volume from EC2, 100% doable. The challenge you have here is the question's asking for a single shared volume where we're editing multiple files. When we're talking about S3, this is object storage, not block storage.
Yep.
So some of the benefits that you get with block storage, like file locking, won't be available in an S3 option.
Okay.
Right? So while you can access the volume across multiple instances, probably not the best way to share a volume and edit files. But EFS, on the other hand, definitely is a good option.
Perfect.
It can be attached, you can share, you get all the mechanisms around locking. So for me, I would choose option 2 as our answer here.
Locking in number 2, 100%. You're
Cool.
up to 100% agreeing with you here, Rick.
The viewers are on
Let's check it
fire.
out. I think we're pretty confident. Number 2,
Cool.
EFS.
Great.
It is.
Good job.
Alrighty, question number 4, a bit of RDS.
Okay, cool.
Let's
do
do
some
it.
database stuff.
How are charges calculated for data transferred between Amazon RDS and Amazon EC2 instances in the same availability zone and VPC?
Okay. All right. So first of all, RDS, so
Yep.
relational database service. Now, this particular question is asking us to calculate charges on data transfer. Right. So there are a number
that's
of
the
different
key.
options here in terms of how RDS is charged, but specific to the question today, we just want to talk about data transfer.
Okay.
So before we go into answering the question, let's just talk about some of the options here around how
Okay.
RDS is charged. So usually RDS is charged, well not usually, it is. It's charged based on the number of hours and the disks, the disk types that are used. So you will always also, get charged on data transfer if it's egressing your VPC or availability zones or regions. So, but this particular question really dives into specifically saying that it's an EC2 instance in the same availability zone inside a VPC communicating with the RDS instance. So all those intra-transfer charges probably don't apply.
Got it.
All right.
Okay.
So we're sort of left with a couple of options around, do we get charged for IOPS or is there no charge at all?
Okay.
All right. So in this particular case, we don't really need to worry about IOPS because we're not talking about data charges for RDS as a service. We're talking about the charges related to data transfer.
And that's a key point there, Rick. Really carefully reading the question.
Yeah.
Right?
Pro tip of the day, read the question twice.
Okay. maybe a third time as well in this instance.
Yeah, definitely. The more specific the question is, the easier it will be to answer the question, and you'll be able to rule out some of the available answers pretty quickly. So, and here, if you didn't read the question correctly, you may actually go, well, you do get charged for IOPS, depending on how you set up your RDS instance. But for this particular case, I'm going to go with option 4, which is there is no charge.
Straight up, option 4.
Option 4.
100%. Once again,
All
agreeing with you.
Good stuff.
I think we must be making the questions too easy, Rick.
I don't
Might
know.
have to have a word with producer John. We need to
Maybe the viewers
up the
are upping
ante
their
on
game.
That's right. They've tuned in enough. We're starting to get it all right. I mean, I hope.
They're using the official guides, it's giving them all the right answers.
That's exactly right. But hopefully outside the box too, right?
Yeah.
That's what we like. All right, let's move on to question number 5. CloudFormation.
Yep, cool.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Let's do it. A user wants to launch an AWS CloudFormation stack that creates an Amazon S3 bucket. However, the user does not have permission to create buckets in Amazon S3. How can they successfully launch that stack?
All right. Okay, this question has a fair bit to unpack.
It does.
So let's start with some of the basics. So CloudFormation.
Yeah.
So it's a service that we can use to describe and provision resources in AWS. It is a great mechanism for creating infrastructure as code and not having interactive access to consoles. There is also probably a cool call out here in terms of CloudFormation can actually also be used via service catalog.
So of course, yeah. It's actually not mentioned there. Good call out.
So if you wanted, you could actually use service catalog to initiate CloudFormation stack builds, which is an even better option. So, but let's just stick to the question at hand that we've got.
Note to John, let's get Rick to do some questions for us.
Let's do some service catalog questions.
Yeah.
And we might actually come back to service catalog as we go through the answers here.
Okay.
All right, so the question is asking us, how do we launch the stack when the user doesn't have permissions? So let's look at number 1, using switch user. So switch user is a way for a user to assume a role to gain permissions to do an activity inside AWS. Switch user is a great option, but under the context of switch user, we're talking about direct access to resources.
Yep.
Right? The question here isn't asking the user to create the S3 bucket, it's asking CloudFormation to create the S3 bucket. So using the switch user option is probably not the right answer here.
Okay.
But let's look at some of the other available ones. Let's go down to number 4. So
moving to number 4.
We're just going to skip the middle.
I love it. Okay.
Go straight to the bottom. All right. So adding S3 permissions to the CloudFormation service linked role.
Okay. Service link. Yep.
Yeah. So service link roles are a unique role or set of permissions that are foundational to the service. So it's how the service operates and how it communicates with other services on your behalf.
Okay.
So in this particular case, while you can modify service link roles, this wouldn't be the ideal way to do this. Right? Service link roles aren't really made for this purpose because we're talking about how do we, the user, successfully launch a stack to create the resource.
Okay.
So I would discount number 4. So that leaves us with number 2 and number 3.
Okay.
So number 3, which is talking about adding an IAM role to the stack template and then configuring the bucket to use that role. This just sounds weird. It just sounds wrong.
It does a bit.
Yeah. So, and the reason it sounds a bit strange is because what we actually want to do here is create a bucket, not provide access to a bucket. Whereas the available option here is talking about configuring the bucket to use the role, but that doesn't make any sense because we haven't created the bucket yet. So we wouldn't attach an IAM role to a bucket in order to create it.
Got it.
So that leaves us with number 2. When launching the stack, we'll select an IAM role that has the necessary permissions to create the bucket. This is the logical answer here for CloudFormation. You can do quite a lot, some powerful stuff with CloudFormation, IAM roles, and if we add Service Catalog on top to provide a mechanism for administrators to create resources where they generally wouldn't want or wouldn't have permissions to do so. So it gives them that self-service capability, allows them to create the resources that they need, but without the administrators of AWS having to actually provide the users the permissions to do it themselves.
Perfect.
It's a great, safe way to do things. So I'm going to lock in number 2.
Very logical. Locking in number 2. Third question in a row, you have 100% agreement online.
Let's see if we can keep it going.
Number 2, it is. Okay, so I think we might quickly break for our tip of the week.
Okay.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
So you are certified.
Yep.
Is that correct?
I do, yep.
If you could give our viewers a single tip for when going into that exam room, what would it be?
All right, so before you get into the exam room, my tip is make use of the AWS accounts, right? So we provide access to create accounts. You can leverage the free tier, which gives you access to a lot of services for the first 12 months at no cost.
Yep.
And it is a great way to practice and learn.
Okay.
Yeah, especially as you are approaching the exam, there will be questions that you may want to test. They won't all be theory-based. Using your AWS account is a perfect way to prep for the exam.
I love it. We haven't had that one yet
That's
either.
my tip.
Awesome. Let's move on to question number 6.
All right.
Bit of networking.
Cool.
Oh, and we have, if I can draw all of our viewers' attention to the screen, our first image question.
All right.
We don't normally do this, so important to have a bit of a look here.
Breaking new ground.
Yeah. This network ACL has been applied as an inbound rule on a subnet. Which statement is correct?
Okay.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
So let's just have a look at the question again and see if there are any keywords here.
Okay.
So there's one keyword that I want to point out, which we're talking about inbound rules.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So we're assuming here that the outbound rule allows any traffic. Okay. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the available statements.
Yep.
All right. So all traffic is blocked in both directions. Maybe.
No.
All traffic is allowed except SMTP, which is blocked. All traffic is allowed inbound except SMTP, which is blocked within the subnet.
Okay.
And all traffic is allowed inbound except SMTP, which is blocked from entering the subnet.
Okay.
Okay, so there's a lot here.
There is a lot.
Right. So before we answer it, let's just have a quick chat about how network ACLs work.
Okay, let's do it.
And we didn't call out anything around security groups, but it's probably worthwhile to say or call out the distinction between ACLs and security groups.
Yep.
So when we're talking about network access controls or network ACLs, we're talking about the perimeter of the subnet.
Yep.
Right. Whereas when we talk about security groups, we're sort of talking more about the instance or the resource. Right. So, nice distinction here. They can be used together. Most customers will do that. In this particular case, we're talking about the perimeter of the subnet, so traffic entering the subnet.
Okay.
So let's have a chat quickly about rule evaluation.
Okay.
So when a network ACL is evaluated, the general rule is that processing occurs from the smallest number to the highest number, and as traffic matches a rule, it will drop out.
Okay.
So in this particular case, the rule evaluation process would be rule 50, then rule 100, and then the star rule. All right, and the star rule is a rule that is a catch-all. So if your traffic doesn't match any of the available rules that precede it, the catch-all or the star rule will apply to the subnet. So in this case, if we're not talking about, well, in this case, we've got all traffic being allowed in rule 100. So the star rule doesn't really apply in this particular case.
Yep.
But rule 50 and rule 100 definitely do. All right, so with inbound being the key word in the question, we've got to look at the available options. So all traffic is blocked in both directions, definitely not correct. All right, so we've got an allow rule in there.
Yep.
All traffic is allowed except SMTP, which is blocked in both directions. So with the context of it being an inbound rule and the assumption being that all outbound traffic is allowed, number 2 is out.
Incorrect. Yep.
Yep. So number 3, all traffic is allowed inbound except SMTP, which is blocked, potentially.
Within the subnet.
Yep. And then all traffic is allowed inbound except SMTP, which is blocked from entering the subnet. So the key word there is entering. Right. So for me, when I evaluate this rule, I'm going for option number 4.
Locking in at number 4, we've got 75% online.
That's pretty good.
So yeah, we haven't dropped down too much. Liking number 4. Number 4 it is.
All right.
Thanks
fantastic.
for that. Oh, we got through our first image. I love it. Might have to do that a bit more,
question.
Producer John, for future questions.
And bear in mind, these network ACLs do come up, right? So when we're configuring resources, we will generally use a combination of network ACLs to control flow in and out of subnets, as well as security groups on the resources, just to provide that extra layer of security.
Perfect.
Always good practice.
Compliance. Following on. Good question to follow on from, I think. Okay. Your corporate IT security policy only permits incoming SSH traffic from the corporate IP address range. Unrestricted incoming SSH traffic is not permitted. Mm-hmm. How can you enforce this requirement with minimal effort?
Okay. All right. So
nice and specific.
Yeah, this one there's a lot here. All right. So the question is around compliance, not configuration. All right. So that should be a key call out.
I like that. That's a good, Okay.
And we also call out within the question itself that we're talking about enforcement of the rule rather than specifically just configuring restrictions.
Okay.
Okay, so when we look at the available options that we've got, we can definitely block port 22 using a network access control list, which we spoke about in just the last question.
Yep.
We can definitely block 22 at a security group level, which is associated with a resource inside AWS. So both of those apply, but from a configuration standpoint rather than a compliance standpoint. So the challenge that you would have in this particular question is that how do you enforce that configuration is always there, right? You can definitely set it, but how do you ensure that it's always set?
Okay, got it.
So number 3 is using AWS config rules to identify security groups that violate this requirement.
So on what you've just said, that sounds pretty good to me.
That sounds like a pretty good option. AWS config is a service that allows you to create a set of configuration rules and manage and monitor the configuration changes that occur within your account. It is a great service. We use it all the time with our customers. It allows us to create a set of baseline security rules or guardrails that we can then monitor and react to.
Yep.
So not just detective controls, but also reactive controls, because AWS config rules can then trigger other services to go and remediate certain actions if they do violate certain things.
Nice.
So that sounds like a good option. And then using a NAT gateway in the public subnet. This just doesn't sound
No.
right. Okay, so there's no way that you can enforce or control anything by going down the path of using a NAT gateway in this particular use case. It's great if you want to provide private resources access to public services, you would NAT that out. But in this particular case, we're talking about configuring something and enforcing it. So for me, the logical answer here would probably be option 3, which
AWS
is
config.
AWS config.
And you'll be happy to hear you were back to 100% agreement online.
Good work,
From our
guys.
online viewers as well.
Excellent job.
I mean, I haven't revealed the answer. You just
pretty
know.
confident. Pretty confident.
Number 3 it was.
Right.
Okay. Last question of the day, everyone. Let's have a look at databases.
We powered through these questions.
We did. You have an application that uses an SQL database.
Mm-hmm.
You have decided to use Amazon RDS for that database. The application is only used a few days a week.
Okay.
How can you auto-scale the database to minimize cost?
Right.
Okay.
So-
Cost question.
There's a keyword here, which
Yeah.
is cost. You just touched on it. I think
I might
everybody-
have given it away.
Well, let's just say
Oh, maybe
there's,
not,
there's some
actually.
available options here that,
Yeah.
that, do affect cost, but is it the right way? All right, so option 1, using a scaling group with minimum and maximum numbers of nodes. Okay, this is a great way of providing a controlled environment.
Yep.
So resiliency is kind of how you might use this particular use case.
Is this something you're doing a lot with your customers?
Yeah, sometimes when we move legacy applications across,
Yeah.
they may not be configured to scale. So you may not be able to actually configure them to scale out horizontally. So setting a minimum and maximum node group of say 1 will allow the instance to recover if there was an issue without actually scaling it out and causing application issues. So we definitely see this design pattern being used out with our customers. But it's not going to help you under the context of the applications only used a few days a week to manage cost, right? Because you'll always have the instance running.
So that infrequency and the cost is what we need to concentrate on.
Correct, exactly right. So we're looking for a way that we can manage our costs here.
Okay.
So number 2, configure auto-scaling with minimum and maximum number of IOPS. Again, doesn't sound like it's going to really apply to this particular question because we're talking about the application only being used a couple of days a week, and configuring IOPS in an auto-scaling group isn't going to manage your cost.
And that's a bit cheeky too, right? Because we've seen on the previous questions when 2 of them are sounding the same, it's normally one of those answers. But you're wiping out both.
Both gone in this particular case. So using Aurora serverless with automatic shutdown, this is an interesting option. We might dig into that one in just a second. But we'll just have a look at number 4 and see if this one also applies. And it's not possible to auto-scale RDS databases. This one's out. Right? So we can
get rid of that
definitely
one.
auto-scale RDS databases, which kind of logically leads us to number 3.
But let's have a look. Let's dig into it.
Yeah.
Talk us through it.
So the Amazon Aurora serverless service allows us to configure automatic shutdowns based on schedules.
Yep.
So we can definitely configure a resource to only be available for a few days a week, and it can shut down for the periods that the application's not in use.
Automatically?
So automatically. So what would be great is if we had a bit more specificity inside the question in saying it's available Monday through Friday or something like that, so we could set that configuration up. But most certainly, you can definitely use Aurora serverless and automatic shutdowns to manage cost. We charge resources on the time that they're running. So if it's not running, you're literally only paying for storage associated with the resource that's
Sounds good to me.
been provisioned. So
Oh,
for
I
me,
thought we'd got 100%. Not quite, but almost there.
almost
On the last question.
so
We had a few
close.
people go with number 4, which totally rolled out, funny enough. So let's reveal this last answer. Rick, 100% today.
Cool.
Thank you so much for
You're
filling in for today's episode. We are actually on a break next week, everyone. So we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with a special returning guest. So I hope to see you then. Thanks, Rick.
Thanks. See you later.